Hello and welcome to the next edition of The Absolute Truth with Emerald Robinson. I am obviously not Emerald. I'm your friendly neighborhood guest host, Brandon J. Weichert, at We the Brandon on Twitter X, and also the NatSec guy on emerald.tv. We're talking today with three wonderful guests. We're going to do a panel next with Brendan O'Reilly and Dan Collins. We're going to be talking about China. We're going to talk about economic D-Day. What's going on with that? And then also we're going to have after the panel a nice long chat with my friend Larry Johnson. So let's get into it. We're going to bring on Brendan O'Reilly as well as Dan Collins, two of my friends. Brendan O'Reilly, as some of you may remember, is the author of, I think, one of my favorite China books in recent memory. Everyone is Wrong About China. He goes through 10 myths and 10 facts that we might not know about a lot about China. And also returning guest, our friend Dan Collins, host of Chaos Incorporated on YouTube, and a man with many, many years in doing business in China with rare earth minerals. So sort of an important thing right now. Guys, thanks for doing this. Let's just dive in. The Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, who, whatever people think about him, this is a guy who is savvy. He comes from the financial world. He was one of the inner circle. Again, not casting moral judgment here, but he was one of the inner circle for George Soros for a long time. My point here is this is a guy who understands the market, understands finance. He comes at it from a high degree of expertise, and yet he's declared economic D-Day on Iran. But the whole thing's sort of contingent on China, and China's saying, we're not playing. Dan, what's going on here?
Well, to your point, Bessett is a macro hedge trader, and it's the first time anyone with that level of expertise has been in the job. He knows all about currency manipulation. He was with Soros when they broke the pound, and so he knows all the games. He knows how to do the manipulation. The problem is that Iran's been sanctioned for so long and not part of the dollar system that those tools I don't believe are there to control it. China's already responded with no. So China's going to do what China's going to do. They're going to continue to trade with Iran. None of the sanctions, as far as I saw, hit any Chinese banks. Most people are saying this D-Day is as much ado about nothing. There was nothing there other than talk from what I've seen so far.
Yes, and I've been saying D for dud. Dud Day. Brendan, is China... I guess, is China in the driver's seat now? It certainly feels like if we don't get China on board, D-Day doesn't happen. That wasn't how the original D-Day went.
Yeah, I would say it's important to keep in mind, like, the United States has a lot of financial leverage in the global system, but that doesn't necessarily always translate into raw economic leverage. As Dan pointed out, Iran's kind of outside the dollar system. They're very dependent on trade with China. And in terms of being on the driver's seat, the U.S. needs to realize that China itself has huge leverage, specifically in terms of the rare earths materials. Those are some of the materials that the U.S. needs now to rebuild the weapon systems that were destroyed or used fighting Iran. And of course, China's not really in a mood to help the U.S. out with this. So, in terms of what happens next, it's hard to say. But if the U.S. really wants to go play tough with China, China certainly has a wide variety of ways to retaliate. And I think the fact that you haven't seen those sanctions imposed on the state-owned Chinese banks, to me, kind of indicates that this economic D-Day, it's more rhetoric than reality.
And and we'll stick with you, Brendan. What exactly is the global South in particular? What are these developing countries as they watch sort of this tete-a-tete between the United States and China? What are they taking away? Are they saying, wow, the Americans are still the dominant power? Or are they starting to hedge, saying, maybe China has an edge here and we want to get on that train, before it leaves the station?
Well, in terms of economic ties, there's not much hedging going on. The vast majority of countries in Latin America, in Asia, and Africa have far deeper trade ties, and at this point, growing financial ties with China than they do with the United States. But that's just the economic aspect of things. In terms of raw military power, obviously the U.S. is still very powerful, and especially in areas that are relatively far from the United States. So what you do see is a lot of countries that are more fearful of potential U.S. military action, but at the same time trying to further deepen their economic ties with China. And a lot of countries don't necessarily see a contradiction in that, unless of course they're U.S. treaty allies, like for example the Philippines or Australia. In which case, yes, then that starts having some contradictions and some conflicts in terms of the domestic politics. But overall, I think a lot of countries see what the U.S. is doing as being a big destabilizing force in the world. It used to be the mantra that the U.S. Navy is there to protect trade routes and to ensure global stability. But especially by starting this war with Iran, we're seeing the U.S. degrade trade routes. We're seeing the U.S. Navy interdict ships going to and from Iran, and in some cases, disabling them by force. So I think that a lot of long-standing ideas that have kind of underpinned the post Cold War era are now being turned on their head.
Yeah, I agree. And Dan, you've dealt with rare earth mineral production. You deal with these sort of higher end industrial practices inside China. You and I have spoken before about this, but I want to bring it up again. The United States has blown through much of its critical arsenals. It needs rare earth minerals to replenish them. Hegseth and everybody's saying, don't worry, in a few years we'll replenish. Is China going to let that happen?
Well, today China, I would mention too that the data came out today that China is still getting 1.2 million barrels a day of oil from Iran, slightly less than they got last year. It's almost, I mean, all of this China's like it has no worries for the oil. On the material side, China continues to play. They know they have the trump card, which is the rare earth, and all types of processing. This is stuff you can't just learn overnight. You have to be able to process it to 6N, 9N. That's extremely high level. Nobody can do that outside of one or two facilities in China. So they turn those taps on, they turn them off. I know they were turning some exports on last week because she's visiting Trump, but they can turn them on and off anytime they want. U.S. faces, we're deindustrialized. We face massive issues, and which I've talked about for 25 years. And I think now we're looking at a point where we've lost the economic war, we've lost the manufacturing war. Now we're on the cusp of losing the financial war. And I think China, as Japan implodes, China may take over the yen carry trade, and we may be living in a Chinese financial system where when we started the trade war with China in 2018, their trade surplus was $300 billion. Today it's 1.2 trillion. So they're going to have to vendor finance all these people when the dollar eventually goes down. And we may be living in a Chinese financial system within a decade, and we don't even see it coming.
Okay, let's stay on that for 1 second, Dan. So you think that China is going to take over the yen carry trade? By the way, I think you might be right.
I don't think they want to. I think what may happen. Yeah, I don't think they want to. The currency is not even convertible on purpose. China doesn't like speculators. It doesn't like speculation. It doesn't like these currencies always going up and down. It's hard for real businesses to flourish when your currency's jumping up and down, right? That's why they've always pegged the RMB to international basket of currency. Mm-hmm. But when the dollar goes down and the yen goes down, Japan You see their bond market's in slow collapse right now. We intervened in the currency market. The currency's still decreasing. It's still at 160. They've sold more adult diapers in Japan now than baby diapers for 2 decades. They missed every tech turn from the Sony Walkman. They missed mobile computing. They missed 5G. They missed everything. And now they own, the government's bought half the stock market, half their government debt, and now they're selling treasuries, and the Dutch are selling treasuries, and everyone's selling treasuries. And when that Japanese yen carry trade finally implodes, we may be left in a giant economic downturn where the Chinese financial system, as big as it is, it's absolutely massive because it's on top of this massive economic base, right? They may be forced at some point in the future, I'm not saying it's today or tomorrow, but at some point in the future, logically speaking, we will probably end up living in a Chinese financial system like we're living in a Chinese manufacturing system today.
And what you're saying aligns with what I've heard from people who I know like Peter Alexander. They're all saying, though, the
Mm-hmm.
Chinese did not set out to do this. This was
No,
not like they woke up. This
no,
is sort of just natural evolution. Okay, so
yeah.
Brendan, we're going to bring sexy back. We're going to talk about bond yields a little bit. Let's talk about bond yields. We're looking at the bond yield is basically what it was at going into 2008. What's going on? Are we heading off a cliff here in the United States? Because Bessent and everybody is saying, nope, we got it, don't worry. But it looks like every time they do something to try to, stem the bleeding financially, it's not having the same effect. What say you?
Well, we have to acknowledge the fact that the U.S. federal government is in debt over $40 trillion now. That seems like a crazy number that you can't even wrap your brain around, quite understandably. But to break that down, that's more than $100,000 per man, woman, and child in this country, just in federal debt. So it's an insane amount. And in order to reduce bond yields over the long term, the federal government would either need to reduce spending significantly or increase taxes significantly. And neither of those seem especially politically feasible now or in the foreseeable future. Everyone just wants to kick the can down to the next generation or the next administration or the next Congress. And that's what they've been doing for decades and decades. So in terms of the geopolitical implications of this, it's enormous because when the bond yields go up, that's because people don't want to buy U.S. federal government debt. So they have to offer juicier yields to convince people to buy them. You've seen a big spike in bond yields since the Iran war started, which makes sense on two levels. First, war is expensive. It costs a lot of money to fight a war halfway around the world. And secondly, you also potentially have decreased buyers for U.S. Government debt because the oil out of the Persian Gulf is disrupted. Effectively, that means Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and to a lesser degree Saudi Arabia, have less money to buy U.S. treasuries. So the combination of those two factors really puts a strain on the U.S. Deficit and the U.S. debt. And you also have to think about it, there's raw numbers, but you can also think about it in terms of percent of GDP. Back in 2007 or 2008, around the time of the global financial crisis, when the U.S. government was paying the same rate for treasuries, the debt as a percentage of U.S. GDP was way, way lower. So, there's a lot of factors going on. It seems like no one really cares about the debt, or if they do care, then they're not willing to do anything about it. And then on top of that, you have these sanctions and the threat of sanctions, which basically forces other major economies to start pivoting away from using the U.S. dollar. So the combination of these two things, it's almost like if someone were purposefully trying to destroy the U.S. dollar's position as the global reserve currency, I don't know what you would do differently.
I agree. I agree. And Dan, let's look at the Chinese situation. You and I also have spoken about this previously. I've heard from, again, people like Peter Alexander, who everybody seems to say the economy is, quote, softening in China. So we have a lot of problems here, but China's also running into some headaches. What's going on in China? It looks like they're pivoting away from real estate market and they're trying to get more advanced manufacturing. Is this pivot workable? Can they do it, or are they going to hit a brick wall soon?
They're in I think about 2 years ago, I started calling China's in this transition phase economically from really, low income to middle income. And then on purpose, they squashed their housing market. So I can tell you, I have friends who bought homes for $100,000 that were valued at more than $2 million. So the run up in Chinese real estate has been insane for 20 some years. She finally said, homes are for living, not for speculation. And they've completely clamped down on the housing market, and it has drug it down. They're probably down, it depends on what city you're in, but down 20-30% from the top. Local governments have even had to take over the real estate building, like the private developers are pretty much out of the market. There's all kinds of incentives to drive housing. China also has issues with demographics. The generations are kind of inverted because of the one child policy. So they're in a transition. And also, you got to remember, their grandparents had no jobs. Their parents were factory workers, and they have a master's degree in electronics. So there's this whole economic phase transition in China from factory worker to white collar engineer. So every year they have to absorb, I don't know how many, 50 million new STEM graduates, whatever. So they have issues. There's high youth unemployment. But as we see industry by industry, they just continue to run roughshod over us. Humanoid robots. I think everyone saw that online, the humanoid robot Olympics in China. EVs, they went from no exports to 12 million units in within 3-4 years. That was Fortress Japan's last economic lever, was its automotive sector exports around the world. It's going to absolutely crash Japan. So yeah, they're taking over industry by industry. United States alone, we're going to pay billions of dollars this year for cancer remedies from China. The biotech sector in China is just booming. So there are bright spots, but overall, it's very slow. The domestic car industry, I think, is down 20% this year. So it's a tale of two worlds in China, right? They're progressing technically and globally, but yet domestically, it's in a big transition right now.
And Brendan, I'm seeing these economist pieces in which they're now saying basically, yeah, China may lead in advanced robotics and they may be catching up and basically, neck and neck with us in AI, but it's too cheap in China. It's too cheap. The argument now is they can't make any money doing everything they're doing. Is there any rebuttal to that? Because I just think this whole sort of the economist line of attack on China is very bizarre. As an American, I wish things were more cheap than they are.
Yeah, exactly. As technology develops, as things become more efficient, as there's more production, things should get cheaper. I mean, that's a basic idea of capitalism, really.
That's right.
So yes, part of it too is the Chinese did not go crazy with helicopter money stimulus during COVID. I think that's the biggest factor. I visited China about 2 years ago, and I was shocked. Prices had gone up a little bit over the previous, say, 5 years, but not nearly as much as in the States. So yes, I mean that's a basic idea that as technology improves, as there's more factories, especially with AI and automation, things should get cheaper. Naturally, things should get cheaper. The only reason things wouldn't get cheaper is if, for whatever reason, central banks and authorities are pumping the economy full of printed currency. So, yes, I think that line of attack is true, and it's not just about production. It's not just about technology. It's also about competition. There's a lot of fierce competition. For example, amongst Chinese EV car manufacturers, there's dozens and dozens, or there's hundreds now of companies that are coming up trying to make the humanoid robotics. So yes, a healthy market and improve technology, things should get cheaper. That's a good thing.
Well, it's good for China. It's it doesn't seem like it's translating here. Dan, how is it that we have over 4,000 data centers, and supposedly I'm told by all my friends in Silicon Valley, and I have quite a few, that we need data centers to maintain AI competitiveness. We have over 4,000 and counting. China has only about 367, yet Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, says China's only about 5 or 6 months behind us in AI development. What gives?
It's a great question, and I think I saw you post that on X, and I thought, that
Yeah.
is a good question. You, I think somewhat. So the AI front, there's a difference between AI frontier models and then just everyday inference, right?
Mhm.
Answering questions on Claude or Google or whatever. On the frontier labs, it's not hard to be 6 months. Some people say they're ahead in certain areas already. Some
Yeah.
of these frontier
Yeah.
models. Personally, I have an AI company. I use some China. In fact, it was announced yesterday. OpenAI's legal AI firm called Harvey, which has over 100,000 clients now in the United States. Their back end is a Chinese AI. So like they're not even using OpenAI. They're using it for inference. So China has all that power. They're going to be able to provide inference at very, very low cost. Frontier models, yeah, it's kind of just brute force how many GPUs you have for a data center. So that's maybe how we're ahead. But yeah, China has, half of the AI engineers in the United States are Chinese. And China has so many AI and STEM guys that there's just a lot of talented people that are able to tweak these models to keep them competitive despite spending so much less on data centers at this point. However, I will say you are seeing China now. It was announced the last few weeks, massive spending by Alibaba, Tencent. These are the guys controlling all the keys for the inference. And Alibaba this quarter lost $2 billion in inference. So you're going to
Mm.
see, I think what you're going to see is China going to subsidize the world with AI inference so that you're using Chinese systems. And that's why the stocks are down for Alibaba and Tencent is that they're going to get forced to eat a lot of this inference cost to push Chinese AI into the world. And while we try U.S. AI into the world, and while Europe smokes a cigarette and has an espresso. So
Yeah, Europe has really found itself on the wrong side of this thing. Um,
well, I don't know
okay,
if you saw, but Volkswagen announced 100,000 job losses this week. That's going to pivot into 1 million job losses across parts makers, service providers. Their energy now in Europe is 9 times what it costs the United States. I mean, it's like end of days. I'm in Europe right now. Actually, I'm in Serbia, and it's Serbia's okay, but yeah, the rest of Europe is just not in a good spot.
well, let me just ask you then. I wasn't planning to go here, but we're going to be talking about Russia and Ukraine with Larry Johnson next. But you bring up Volkswagen, you bring up these decline in manufacturing. That's a big German company, and Germany's talking about reindustrializing for war. Is this even possible given the downside of what's going on right now,
Yeah, where's the money going to come from, right? I mean, they
or
can't
the
print money like
energy?
we can. Yeah, or the energy, and then are you really building the right things? We just lost the war to Iran. Iran's military budget is 0.88%, the size of the United States military budget. They're fighting sixth gen warfare, which is standoff precision missiles and cheap drones, and we're fighting with the fourth generation Top Gun military. Trillions not enough, throw another half a trillion on it. These
Mm-hmm.
guys aren't thinking. So the question is, like, even if Germany spends the money on defense, is it going to go into the right places? Obviously, it doesn't in the United
Right.
States. So,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, all spending on the military is a waste, right? It'd be better off. So, 1 million Chinese EVs will be sold in Europe this year. That's why Volkswagen's cutting jobs. So, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to have to buy Chinese EVs so you can build weapon systems to fight Ukraine, which might not be there in 16 months. So, it just doesn't make any sense.
I agree. I agree. And piggybacking off of that, Brendan, a lot of people close to the president, to President Trump, or at least supporters of him, we're saying, well, we're going into Iran the way we're doing this because we want to weaken China. Has China been weakened by this war?
Not at all. I remember talking to you. I remember coming on here on March 4th, the fifth day of the war,
Yes.
and saying that it's laughable.
Yeah.
You know, Iran maybe at most, say 5% of China's conventional military capabilities. And they've been able to fight the US to a standstill. What we've learned is that in the unlikely event of a direct conventional war between the US and China, basically every US military base in the West Pacific, anything to the west of Hawaii, is effectively going to get destroyed in the first 48, if not 24 hours. So China has not been weakened at all. Now, they have been hurt in some ways in that they are, a major oil importer. So increased prices aren't good for them, but apparently they can just buy from our strategic reserve, so they'll be all right for now. I really think people have been undersold for just how, thankfully, U.S. military casualties have been pretty low. But there has been literal tons of equipment that's destroyed. We lost about 25% of our total MQ-9 Reaper drone fleet, either shot down or destroyed on the ground by Iranian missiles or drones. I've seen reports of up to 2/3 of Patriot, missile interceptors being destroyed. Something somewhere between 38% and 48% of the THAAD munitions have been expended. Defending against Iranian attacks. So, yeah, higher energy prices. It's not great for China, but if China can pay somewhat higher energy prices and also buy a strategic reserve, while the U.S. is effectively destroying 25 to up to 50% or more of the key weapon systems that it would need to fight China, I think Beijing will take that trade every day and any day.
And Brendan, it looks like they have been able in China to not only offset with their own massive strategic petroleum reserve, which one count had 1.4 billion barrels of oil in there before the war got going. And I'm told they've been able to even replenish that as we're all struggling here. But how important is the electric vehicle revolution, the electrification of China over the last decade? How important is that for China surviving this global energy crunch?
I think it's hugely important, and we've seen this push so far in like personal vehicles, passenger vehicles that a family might buy, but now they're starting to roll it out more and more into commercial trucking. Which is more dependent on diesel, which has really, really gone up in price. And so for them domestically, they're past peak oil demand, almost certainly. Which on top of having a giant reserve that we know of, and honestly, probably they keep that intentionally secret, exactly how much they have, because that'd be a smart thing to do. So the fact that they're pushing electrification for personal vehicles, but also for trucks is huge. They're past peak oil for domestic demand, but also it's helping them expand overseas. They're really selling, millions and millions of these electrical vehicles all over the world, and that's really cementing them as the next auto powerhouse. Going back to talking about as Dan mentioned, the job losses at Volkswagen, we're going to be seeing more and more of that all over the world.
Yes, and when we come back, I am going to want to ask you too about what's going on in Canada, trade wars there. But let's take a quick couple-minute break. I'm Brandon Weichert. They are Dan Collins and Brendan O'Reilly. This is The Absolute Truth with Emerald Robinson on Lindell TV. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Don't you dare touch that dial.
Most people think water's just about filtration, but in reality, it's about balance. What gets removed, what gets left behind, and how the water actually behaves once you drink it. Well, many traditional systems focus on one thing, removal. Reverse osmosis, for example, strips water down completely. It may sound ideal, but it removes minerals that our bodies need. The Century Wellness System was designed with a different philosophy. It removes common contaminants like chlorine, fluoride, and PFAS while restoring key minerals like magnesium and improving alkalinity. It also does all this without tanks and without wastewater, and without requiring a complicated installation. It installs in about 15 minutes under your sink, so instead of overcorrecting, it brings your water back into balance. Please visit CentryH2O.com and use promo code Lindell for 10% off your next purchase.
Welcome to Vocal, the free speech social app that gives you a platform to amplify your voice. Speak freely, connect boldly, and be part of a growing movement for truth, faith, and freedom. Want to know what's happening right now? The Now Playing feature shows you exactly who's live and what's streaming in real time. Check out the show's feed, a non-stop lineup including Lindell TV News 24/7, shows and on-demand programming all in one place. Connect with your favorite host and never miss a show. Explore the featured page for quick access to Lindell TV's top shows. Follow your favorites and watch their newest content flow right into your feed. And when they go live on Vocal, you can join the live chat and be part of the action. Ask questions, share your thoughts, even help shape future shows. Stay informed on issues around securing our elections by following your state's Cause of America account. Join a group and connect on a deeper level, from faith and freedom to the future of our nation. Go to vocal.com or download the app today and be a part of the mission to save our country.
We're back. We are joined again by the panel that we've been chilling out with and learning from this last 30 minutes. Dan Collins, he is the host of Chaos Incorporated, and he has a lot of experience, as you've heard, with the industry in China. And also my friend Brendan O'Reilly, author of Everyone is Wrong About China. Go out and get that book. It's a very easy read, and it's really enlightening. And for what we're talking about, you will kind of get a greater understanding of just what is going on really inside of China, which Western media misses far too often. I did want to ask you in our final segment, and I wasn't planning to, but you're bringing up the EVs and from China and how it's going global. We are now with our partners and friends in Canada, and I'm not saying there weren't problems. There were many problems with the trade relationship with Canada. However, the president seems to have scuttled what was looking like a near deal with Mark Carney's Canada. Now the Canadians are saying we're not only going to potentially cut off energy flows coming into the United States, but we're going to go after the auto industry. Dan, you're from the Midwest. You know a lot about this. What exactly is Canada going to do to our auto industry if this trade war really heats up? And how might China benefit from that?
So, I grew up on the Canadian border near Sarnia, Ontario, Port Huron. So, and some of my family's Canadian, so I know it pretty well. Canada doesn't have an auto industry; they just have American car companies doing assembly in
Right.
Canada, in Ontario. The reason why is that they have free healthcare, so that was cheaper to assemble it in Ontario, bring it back to Michigan. Canada, as my grandfather used to say, is the one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest here. They can't win. They can't. They're not getting 70% of their exports to the United States. So what they should have done, and when you're a member of a trade bloc like the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, you have to have similar tariff rates. So give you an example, steel, we have a 72% tariff rate on steel now under Section 232 from China. But it can come into Canada, and Canada sold us $2 billion of aluminum from China through Canada in the United States at a 0% tariff. So our tariffs against China don't work if anything can come through the door in Canada. So you have to harmonize the tariffs rates. So Canada's got to understand that it's the smaller guy in the fight here, and it's not been, I don't think, realistic. I think Carney, although he can talk professional, I think he's actually not very intelligent. So unfortunately for Canada, it's kind of a mess. We should have sorted this all out long ago. Our data center should be in Quebec with the cheap hydropower. We've been best of friends for hundreds of years. So, and it's ridiculous that we're at this stage between both governments.
I agree. I agree. And Brendan, how serious of a threat is it that you have Doug Ford, who's basically the governor of the equivalent of a state of Ontario, saying we're going to cut off the energy flows going in to North America. Carney sort of indicated in his statement he's open to this. We refine a lot of their oil, though. So how significant of damage will this be as we go into a midterm here in the United States?
I mean, if it actually happens, it could be a pretty big amount of damage. But I think we need to separate the rhetoric from the reality here. I think playing against the U.S. works really well domestically in Canada right now. Yes, they feel that the U.S. has treated them unfairly, but there's all sorts of other cultural and even to a degree historical issues going on there. So beating up against the U.S. and saying we're going to be really tough against the U.S. That plays well in Canada. It also might be a factor a little bit on the other side. There's certain elements in the U.S. that maybe aren't too fond of Canada for a variety of reasons. I think we need to differentiate between what's been threatened and what's actually going to happen. I think both sides are talking very tough, but at the end of the day, as Dan mentioned, Canada is incredibly dependent on the U.S. economically. But also, the U.S. Has a lot of dependency on Canada for raw materials and energy. So I think at the end of the day, there's going to be some sort of negotiated settlement. But the fact that it has blown up this much and become so public and become so politicized in both countries is certainly not an excellent long-term indicator of relations, of good relations between the U.S. and Canada.
Yes, and in our last question here for both of you, well, for Brendan, how significant of a threat is it when Carney implies he's going to start allowing for greater levels of trade? I mean, they already have a large amount of trade with China, but for instance, possibly allowing the EVs. How will that impact North America from China?
I think that, again, this is a situation, it's kind of like the Iran war in a sense that China didn't do anything to bring this about, but they're going to take advantage of the situation as much as they can. I think that, who knows, maybe someday we'll see, joint production of Chinese EVs in Canada. Again, I'm not sure if we're going to get to that point, but I think it does make sense from a geopolitical perspective for Canada to hedge a little bit or say that they're going to hedge in order to get leverage in negotiations with the U.S.
And
I
Dan,
can tell you,
yeah,
I can
go
tell you,
ahead.
Statlanis and Cherry are already talking about a JV in China, in Canada. So they are working towards that. So not only bring imports in, but bring in JVs in Canada from China for the car market.
And what will that do?
Anywhere
What will that do, Dan, to our car market? Because we rely on Ontario, as you said. I mean, what will that
Yeah.
do? Will we eventually see Chinese EVs coming in here?
Well, that's why the tariffs are there, right? I mean, if we
Right.
didn't, then that's what you would see. Same with Mexico. The EVs out of in Mexico now, Chinese EVs are huge. They're getting big. Canada, similar to U.S. though, they like the big SUVs. They like the big trucks. There's very extreme winter weather, so I think GM and Ford will probably hold up okay there. The total Canadian car market's about 1.5 million units. It's not huge, but this is obviously why we want better trade relations. So we buy from them, they buy from us. There's no reason to mess that up.
Yeah. And I should note that Claudia Scheinbaum of Mexico, while they have allowed for the sale of Chinese EVs, she's pushing, or I mean, they might have even passed it, a tariff that will basically stop the sale of a lot of Chinese EVs into Mexico. So I guess we'll have to see, because Scheinbaum's not a fan of Trump, but yet she is kind of going along with that. So we'll have to see where things go. I really, though, think you guys have been on the forefront of the analysis of China, so I appreciate your time. They are Dan Collins, the host of Chaos Incorporated on YouTube. He is also Brandon O'Reilly. He is the author of Everyone is Wrong About China. And we are going to go to a quick other commercial break, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. And then we're with Larry Johnson. Stay tuned.